All right, hello, this is Sam Renault. I'm excited to be joined today by Kait Sheppard. Kait, welcome. If you want to give us a quick background on who you are and what we're going to be talking about.
Hey, Sam. Thanks for having me. So my name is Kait Sheppard. I work for a PR and integrated marketing agency called Taylor, based in New York. And my role and background is particularly in public relations, but in this day and age, really spans the whole marketing gamut. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today about informational interviews, particularly in our virtual age. Since the pandemic, I think we've all figured out really quickly how to do everything virtual. So this will be a quick one-on-one about how to do that via Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever platform is most comfortable for you.
Perfect. Well, this is, as you said, extremely valuable stuff. I think informational interviews are sort of the bedrock of any effective networking, and I'm sure you'll get into this, but it's really the jumping off point, right? Like that's where you start the relationship, but it's not the end of it. That's really how you initiate these long-term relationships. So I know you've got some slides you want to talk through, so if you want to pull them up and let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. While I'm pulling them up, just to kind of double back on what you mentioned, I think informational interviews before COVID were so important, and that was maybe a little bit difficult for us to do and take the time out of our day, whether it was a breakfast meeting or getting out to coffee. And actually doing it virtually gives us a lot of opportunity to kind of go ahead and embed that into our schedules in a way that's just functionally a lot easier. So I think that if you're not taking the time out of your day to do it, it's just something that you can easily fit in to the work week or your internship week, whatever you have going on. And yeah, great way to meet people when we can't physically be in front of each other.
Yeah,
so
couldn't
I'm
agree more.
gonna
No,
go
go ahead.
through pretty quickly. This presentation is really, I try to keep it pretty top line because it's so easy, but there's so many ways that I think as professionals and even maybe as younger people trying to get your foot in the door, maybe there's things that we do that we don't inherently think that we're doing wrong, but it could be a little bit better, a little bit more polished. So we're going to kind of start at the very beginning of how do you reach out to get an informational interview. And that's really starting formally. It's an email. We'll talk through that a little bit. Asking for what you want. So kind of what is the meat of that email? What are you asking for? Proactively communicating, meaning how do you set up that interaction? Again, like in the past, you would say, hey, we're going to meet at, XYZ coffee shop at 9 a.m. Now it's a little bit more complicated in trying to figure out what link or what method you're going to connect by. So just want to put some ground rules down there. And then finally, how do you prepare for the conversation? And then how do you follow up with that person and thank them for their time? So starting formally and introducing yourself, I think that this can, really feel like, a duh moment, like we know how to introduce ourselves, but I've seen this, way too many times. It not be enough when someone has maybe reached out to me for an informational interview, or I'm trying to connect with someone where I really don't understand how they got my information, or why maybe it would be beneficial for them to talk to me. So I've actually put up here an email. This is an actual email that I've received from a student. And she reached out and she asked to meet with me because she was assigned as my mentee. So, looking at this email, she introduced herself. She explained why she was reaching out. And she was asking for a time to chat, which at the crux of this email is not bad at all. I think that all of those points that I just talked about are captured here, but I think that this email could be a little bit better, and I wanted to share with whomever is watching this video, how you can really kind of plus up that first impression via email. So someone really says like, wow, this person has their stuff together. I definitely want to talk to them. They seem like a really engaged person that I could help in whatever career path they are interested in. So asking for what you want. So again, I think that these better emails will really help you stand out. So I have kind of typed up, my better version of the previous email, and she or whomever this is asking to reach out and connect. But they're also sharing, the why behind it. Maybe they're a senior in college, or maybe they are an interning in a certain field and they're interested in public relations or sports marketing or whatever the background there may be. But I really think that upfront is important context and understanding, okay, why is this person interested in talking to me? And then the second part of this email is really what I think will like seal the deal. So asking specifically how you would like to meet. And so I would say always ask for 30 minutes. If your conversation goes over 30 minutes, that's great. But I think that professionals are more apt to agree to a 30-minute conversation than maybe an hour. So here I've, just shared specifically, can we meet via Zoom for 30 minutes? And then specific times that, the person would be free. And that way you can go ahead and get the ball rolling on scheduling that time frame. I think it's a really small nuanced piece of the email, but it's really helpful because if you think about it, if you say, oh, hey, are you free next week? Then you're going to have at least a couple more emails back and forth of like, okay, well, maybe I'm free this time. I'm not free at that time. And just the scheduling conflicts. So this just right out of the gate gets to, hey, this is when I'm free. And they can easily choose between these two times or say, hey, I'm not free, but maybe I'm free at another time. And then the closing of, if you're free, I'll share through a Zoom link and a calendar invite, which we can talk about in the next slide. But I really do think whoever is initiating the conversation, who's asking for the meeting, it is then their job to secure the meeting and make sure each party understands how they're connecting.
Yeah, I like that before you move on to the next one, what you just brought up, I was about to ask about that. I've always viewed this as the burden of the logistics of the planning of providing all the details always falls on the person making the ask, not the person being asked. Because you're reaching out and asking for something, you should handle every little minute detail that's going to cause friction, that's going to cause challenges for the professional to actually give into your request or agree to it. So I love that you've included that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing too, and I use like the mind blown emoji because this is essentially what you want to get at is, a professional receives this email and they think, oh man, like this is such a great introduction from, this younger person. I really want to talk to them. So again, this email is not, at the core of it, it's not difficult. It's, a few more sentences, a few tweaks, but it really makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think the other piece of this too that I was going to mention, my kind of rule in life, whenever you're communicating with somebody, if you're trying to send a bunch of information, think about what questions they may have after reading that before they're going to be ready to respond. And if you can remove that stinger and make sure all of their questions are answered right off the bat, then you're doing everybody a strong service, because then we don't get back to what you already mentioned, that you're going to have to send 6 more emails back and forth to figure out the what, the where, the when, the why. And so I love that, again, you've really cleared that up with all of this, the way you've improved that first email, which would work. I also have, and maybe this is a personal pet peeve, but when they said that, I'm reaching out to you because you've been assigned to me, like you shouldn't be reaching out because it was an assignment. You should be reaching out because you want to learn. And so the way you've rewritten this one to say, look, I'd love to meet you to discuss your role, learn about you. I think that's a really good way to sort of flip that perspective, because otherwise it feels like the student's just checking a box. Like, this is for a grade, I don't really care, but it's an assignment, so please schedule with me.
Sure. I found that in a lot of mentor-mentee programs. And I think that yeah, it does feel like to the professional, like you're checking a box. And I think if you can just make it more relationship based, then you're really going to get the most out of it, as opposed to it to feel, like a transaction.
Agreed. Like it.
Cool. So just adding on to that email about proactively communicating, once the professional says, yes, maybe I'm free to meet at 3 p.m. this Friday, it goes back to your point, Sam, like the onus is on the person who's reaching out to schedule the invite. So, in today's virtual world, there is so many platforms, Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, and a lot of these have free, like Zoom, you can have an account where you get 40 minutes of your meeting for free. So it's really super easy to find a way to connect, but it is on you as the student or the mentee or the person reaching out. So make sure that you are, after you secure that meeting, you're sending a calendar invite. In the calendar invite has that link of how you'll connect. And I personally like the, meetings where we're seeing each other face to face, like this, Sam. But, if maybe you're not as comfortable and maybe it's just a phone call where, you're requesting to call them just directly on their cell, which that's totally fine. But I think getting in the reps of the face-to-face is really important, especially as we continue to do work and connect virtually. I think, we can kind of lose some of that finesse that we have when we're in front of another person. So I would just consider that as you are connecting. And then the second part of this is like, there's homework before you even meet the person. Look at their LinkedIn, prepare questions in advance. Look at the company that they work at and see, what's on their website. Do they have social media? Like, what are they posting on Instagram? All of those things I think can be really like valuable nuggets of information. One, so you're not just asking them to rattle off their work history. That's not really productive use of time when you only have 30 minutes. But also it really shows that you care, that you're interested. For example, if you want to work in sports and you're connecting with someone who maybe works at the Hornets, did they just have a game the night before you're chatting? Does that person, are they working specifically like in-game marketing? Did some type of sponsorship happen that you saw when you were watching the game? I mean, this is getting really nuanced, but all of it shows that you're paying attention, you're there, you're excited, and I think it gets the conversation rolling in a much more smooth and just interactive way, where it doesn't feel like, the professional, again, is just kind of rattling off their work history and sharing with you like the 101 of marketing.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point to make, especially in sports. If your dream is to connect with somebody who's in football operations with the Tampa Bay Bucks and you email them the Friday before Super Bowl Sunday, they're never going to respond to that email. You've got to be a whole lot more aware of what's going on around you. So I like that you bring that.
Yeah,
I've got a question about
definitely in sports. Go ahead.
A question about the sending the Zoom invite and for scheduling in general. Do you recommend 30 minutes, which I think I agree with. I think that's great. It's amazing if these things run over, if the professional actually gives you that extra time. Do you recommend them scheduling in a bit of a buffer on their own calendar just so they make sure they're available if the conversation does run long? And then how, like in that conversation, you hit your 30-minute mark and you're still going? How do you handle that as the student?
That's a great question. As a student, I would always give yourself a buffer. That is so important. You never want to say, hey, our 30 minutes are up, got to go to my, next class. So definitely at least a 15-minute buffer, I would say, is, a safe time frame. Even 30 minutes would be better, just to make sure that that conversation, has kind of run its length of time and you've gotten everything out of it that you intended to. I would say that the way that I always handle meetings, even a professional world, when they are running over at time, I'll always say, hey Sam, I know that we're right at 30 minutes, and I want to be really respectful of your time. Do you still have a few more minutes to finish our conversation? And leave it on the other person to say, oh hey, I've got to run to another meeting. Thanks for flagging that we were at time. Or they can say, oh, we're having such a great conversation, let's keep going. So I think that's a really easy way to not feel like you're intruding on someone's day and going over time, and just giving them the option.
I view that as an interesting way to sort of gauge the professional's interest in what you're talking about too. Like if we hit the 30-minute mark and I say, hey, I know we're at 30 minutes. Do you have a few more minutes to discuss this? And if they just say, no, sorry, and that's the end and they're gone, then there's probably not, there wasn't a strong connection, and maybe they're not going to be that interested in a follow-up conversation. But if they say anything along the lines of, I've got 10 more minutes, I can continue to talk, or I'm out of time now, but please email me and let's schedule another follow-up, then that's your immediate, I know exactly how well this went, and I know that I've got a next conversation coming. So I think it's also kind of a good strategic way to gauge the success of your relationship launch.
Absolutely. So after you've secured this meeting, you've prepared for the conversation, and you get to the conversation, I think your research is worth the reward. And again, we kind of talked about this in the last slide, but those thoughtful questions are going to help you uncover opportunities. I think that once you start talking to a professional, inherently, we want to help. We want to connect people with internships and job opportunities and other people that are going to further help them in that job discovery phase. So again, the thoughtful questions and the research, I can't really stress enough that just using 30 minutes to an hour of your time the day before the conversation to look at what that professional is doing and looking at what their job entails and maybe what the organization is doing in that time frame is so important. And as you get through the call, I think it will become very clear kind of where the conversation is heading based on maybe if you're looking for an internship or you're just really in the discovery phase of maybe I do want to work in football operations, maybe I don't. So it can go a myriad of ways, but having those questions, I think, will just help you as the student make sure that you're kind of getting what the most out of the conversation. And then I always would say at the end of any conversation when it is, this talking from a student to a professional, ask them to introduce you to someone else. And I even do this as a professional if I'm trying to kind of seek out information is, okay, who is the next person that I can talk to and kind of get another perspective or learn a different piece of that, job or what it entails. So I think the closing, and you don't have to use this every time, but the closing can really be, hey, I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for, all of this information and for your time. If there's someone else that you would recommend I reach out to based on our conversation, I'd love an introduction.
I think I love that too. And I think my question there, and you just answered it, but sort of generally speaking, like how do I know when the right time to make those kinds of asks is? And then even before that, you mentioned, if the informational interview is sort of geared toward finding you an internship, whether it's just a getting to know thing, when is the right time? I should have started with this from the jump. When's the right time to even reach out and ask about informational interviews? Like at what stage in my personal career and professional development as a student should I be doing this to be most effective?
Sure. I mean, I think informational interviews can be done starting, as early as a freshman year. I don't think that there's really, I don't think you have to be a junior or a senior or know necessarily what you want to do to start doing informational interviews, because that's the point of it, is to gather information. So I see far too many students that I talk to say, okay, well, I went down this path of a certain major and I came to my junior or senior year and realized maybe I didn't really want to do that, or I didn't realize it entailed X, Y, and Z that, I'm not really passionate about. And, I think that is unfortunate, because you could have had so many conversations earlier than your last few years of college, which would have, opened up, these doors to say, okay, well, maybe I need to pivot, or I need to kind of tweak what I'm learning so that it's going to really be a fruitful career path for me. So I don't really think that any time is too early. I've even seen students in high school, true go-getters. I'm always excited to have those conversations. They're trying to figure out, what do I want to major in college? Maybe that to make sure that I'm spending my money wisely, I'm getting an education somewhere that maybe that is a specialty of that institution. So again, I don't think it can ever be too early to start these conversations, where it really kind of changes from the informational part to how do I get an internship. I think that is, an interesting question. I'd always recommend, again, as many internships as you can throughout your, education journey is really helpful when you're trying to go out into the job market. So informational interviews that lead to internships can look very different. It could be a shadowing experience where maybe you are shadowing someone for a day or a week in their role. It could be, a short stinted internships where it's a couple weeks or a couple months, or even long term that's paid. All of those kind of progression of types of internships can happen at various times, but again, the earlier the better, because if you are having those experiences when you are a freshman or a sophomore and you figure out quickly, I like this part of marketing, or I don't like this other part of the front office operations side, you're able to really hone in on what does your career journey potentially look like, and then what kinds of jobs you'll be seeking when you graduate, as opposed to going to the job search saying, I don't really know what I want to do or where I want to be, so applying for everything and it feeling like a really overwhelming experience.
Yeah, I like that's all really helpful. The second part of this with asking them to introduce you to another professional, I think that's great, especially if it's gone well. Like, you're more likely to get a good response there if you've had a really good conversation. I also like the idea of students kind of getting themselves homework out of this. So I've always recommended, find something you can ask of the professional that would give you a really easy opportunity to follow back up. So ask for a book recommendation or some other recommendation of like, hey, what can I do next? And then once you do that thing, it gives you a chance to follow up and say, hey, I did that. Here's what I took from it. Can we talk about that? And you clearly, this is something that impacted you. I want to tell you about my experience. So I love like it really is kind of getting the professional to assign you homework. Then they're going to think about it too. If you can challenge the pro to think differently or reflect on something that's been important to them, it's going to leave them with a positive sort of emotional reaction to your whole conversation as well.
Yeah, I like what you just said about the book recommendation. I also find that, that's a great follow-up tool, and we're kind of getting a little bit further down the line, but maybe in a couple months after you have talked to a certain professional, maybe you read an article in Sports Business Journal or somewhere, and it reminds you of the conversation that you had with that professional. That's a great way to loop back and just, send them the link and say, hey, I just read this. I thought about our conversation and what I learned, in X, Y, and Z area. Hope you're doing well. Maybe would love to reconnect next week, or maybe you saw a job opportunity on their website. That's a great way in the door to say, hey, I saw this article, I thought of you. I also, just in trying to catch up, saw this job opportunity. Do you think it would be a good fit for me? That's always has been a really engaging way to kind of ask for something in like a little bit like lighter tone than, hey, I saw this job. Can you get me in with HR? So I really like that note, Sam.
I like the idea of, I always used to set up Google alerts if I was having an informational interview, or if there's somebody who really fascinated me as a professional that I meet someday, I'd set up a Google alert. So anytime their name appeared in an article, I would just I'd get an email to my inbox that morning with a link to the article, and it would really, really help me keep tabs on all
Yeah.
the professionals I've been networking with.
Yeah, I love that too. I mean, Google can be your best friend, especially those alerts. Even just setting up alerts if you're interested in working in a certain field, and you can kind of create your own keywords around that field, and it, can just auto send you articles, and, maybe some of them you kind of skim through and others you really dive into, but that can be a really great way to just get information and feel like you are in the know of that industry without having actually entered the industry yet.
Yep, that's perfect. I know we're getting short on time now, so let's get into follow-up and bring this thing home.
Yeah, so just the last slide here. I mean, this is, again, pretty simple, but like not skimping on the thank yous and the gratitude part. Maybe I'm a little bit old school, but I used to send thank you notes in the mail. Again, we're in a virtual world where people may not be in their offices, so you don't have a mailing address to send them something from a professional standpoint. And, certainly I think asking for someone's home address seems a little awkward. So I think in today's day and age, a thank you email is completely okay. I recommend sending that email ideally within a day or two after you've had the conversation. And to your point earlier, it can just be a quick, like, thank you, this is what I learned. Maybe you reiterate that ask of, you mentioned that, you would connect me with X, Y, and Z person. Would you mind sending, that intro email on my behalf? So it's a great way to just kind of solidify, like, this is what we talked about. I really enjoyed it. And then kind of getting whatever the next steps are on paper. And, my last bullet point here, and I think the takeaway is, like, then you just do this all over again. Like, you do it with another professional. Maybe set a goal of how many people you can meet virtually. I find that this, again, could feel really overwhelming when you do it in person, because you're trying to fit this into your schedule and meeting at a coffee shop or up at some networking event. But now you can literally sit in your home and do it first thing in the morning, knock it out in 30 minutes. So it's a great like goal setting exercise to do this maybe a couple times a month, and make sure that you're having continuous conversations with people in industries that are really exciting to you. And, I can't say enough, the networking process of finding internships and finding a job is really, I would say, number one, as opposed to any of the credentials. It's the people that I think every professional will echo that same sentiment. So hopefully, the virtual networking that we've outlined here can be really helpful in expanding that network as we kind of stay in this virtual environment.
I love it. Yep. The key is getting in your reps. Okay, this was incredible. Any final sentence or two, pearls of wisdom you want to leave behind as a last recommendation?
No, I mean, I think I'll go back and just say, like, do it early and do it often. You can start as a high school student doing informational interviews. You can start in college. If you haven't started yet and you feel like you are maybe behind a little bit, that's okay. Just get started. That's the biggest kind of thing that I would impart on any student is, if you feel like, maybe you are running a race beside a friend who they've already done internships and they've done informational interviews and you haven't gotten there yet, that's okay. You're running your own race. And all you have to do is get started, and you'll be so surprised and excited about how quickly it snowballs and how many professionals really, truly want to help. So.
And to that point, I'm in my 30s and I still do informational interviews, and their value does not
Same.
stop when you. All
Yeah,
right, Kat, thank you.
same.
Thank you so much. This was very valuable. I'm excited to have gotten the chance to learn from you through this. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.